So I popped open the internet and said, have a lot of people come recently claiming to be Christ? Look what I found. There's a Puerto Rican man who lives in Florida right now. His name is Jose Luis de Jesus, Jesus, Miranda, who claims to be Jesus and has thousands of followers. And get this, many of his followers are tattooing upon themselves 666. How freaky is that? There's a Canadian sect that has put up a billboard that says, the Messiah is among us. There's a Siberian guy, so we go from United States, Florida, to Canada, to Siberia. There's a guy in Siberia, he used to be a cop. He's got long, blonde hair, kind of looks like the Hollywood Jesus. Once a year, he shows up at some small, out-of-the-way Russian village, and tens of thousands of people show up to hear Jesus talk. Siberia. The Unification Church, which is worldwide, worships, reveres their leader, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, as the incarnation of Christ. So he claims to be Christ. I'd like to get all these guys in a no-holds-barred ring and see what happens. I'm Jesus. No, I am. No, I am. How many of you heard this guy in Tucson who comes on the radio in the morning, and he calls in, people call in and call him Jesus. Hey, Jesus, I want to ask you a question. Come on. Yeah. Somebody said, Steve, you ought to listen to that. I said, no, I'm not interested. You know, I got a book where Jesus talked. It's good for me. British News, headline, December 24th, 1999. Listen to this. This is going to blow your mind. Holy Land overwhelmed with messiahs. Well, if you're going to be Jesus, I guess it's better to be in Jerusalem than Siberia. Israel is beefing up its mental health services as it prepares for an outbreak of Jerusalem syndrome, a condition which convinces thousands of tourists they are Jesus or another biblical figure. All the others, they're the losers, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if you're going to have a delusion, shoot for the top. It's been estimated that about 40,000 people will suffer biblical delusions during their Christmas visit to the Holy Land. 40,000. Whoa. Every year, thousands of tourists become so affected by the holy city's powerful religious icons, they're overwhelmed by delusions that they are the reincarnation of Jesus Christ or one of the disciples. So Jesus says, before he comes back, before the end of the world and Armageddon and all those things happen, there's going to be a bunch of signs, so we know it's getting close. The first sign is many false prophets. Specifically, in this verse, many false messiahs will come. So I'll ask you, is this sign being fulfilled? You'll have to decide, because he says many. What's many? Maybe in 10 years, it's going to be 10 times this number. Don't know what many means. But in my book, we're looking at many. Sign number 2, verse 6, if you're in Matthew 24. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you're not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Well, what's a rumor of war? I looked that up in the Greek. A rumor isn't like what we consider a rumor, where something's being said that's not really happening. A rumor simply means the outgoing of news. So you're going to hear of wars and the outgoing news of wars. Turn on the radio. Hop on the internet. Pick up the newspaper. Seems to be that's all we're hearing about nowadays is the wars. Another website says 10 major wars are going on right now, and they defined major with at least 1,000 military deaths a year. And then other wars, mini wars, with mostly civilian casualties, 32 going on right now. So at least 42 wars are going on right now. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Verse 7, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. See, as the end comes, it's not going to come in a day. There's all these things that lead up to it, and then that day. Are we in that period that's leading up to it, and how close to that leading up to it are we? You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Well, technically, that's always been what a war has been. But it wasn't until just a few years ago that we had World War I, a real global war, followed on the heels by World War II. And many in this room can raise their hand and say, yes, I was watching the news. I even fought during World War II. So we're talking about news that's still current. Nation will rise against nation. There will be famines earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. So when you hear of wars and false messiahs and earthquakes and famines, that's the start of the end. The end's not yet. These are the signs leading up to the end. Wars and famines and earthquakes. Well, earthquakes and wars lead to famine. So it only makes sense that there'd be famines if you're having earthquakes and wars. So I went to a website on earthquakes, the United States Geological Survey, the main website dealing with earthquakes. You know what they said? Again, this will blow your mind. There are 20,000 earthquakes each year. 20,000. That's 50 a day. Jesus said there's going to be earthquakes before I come back. Now, I asked you about the false messiahs. Is that many? I don't know. Maybe there'll be more. Maybe there'll be few. Have there been wars and nations against nations? Yes, there has. Have there been a lot of earthquakes? 20,000 a year. That's insane. We find that hard to believe because they're not happening in Tucson. But this is the United States Geological Survey. This is the government site that tracks these things with their seismographs. Talking about famines now, he says there'll be wars, there'll be earthquakes, there'll be famines. Listen to this about famines from another website. Famines have occurred periodically since ancient times. Most researchers list about 400 famines throughout all of history. So they say periodically there's a famine here, there's a famine there. But listen to this. In the 20th century, the sub-Saharan Sahel region of Africa has been struck by famine several times. In recent years, major famines have occurred in Africa, which they say may be susceptible to famine for more decades to come. Famine in Africa has been most severe where there's wars, civil unrest, those things we just talked about. They exist currently in Chad, Southern Sudan, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Somalia. Well, if there's only been 400 throughout history, and they just mentioned half a dozen right now, we're hearing of famines. So sign number one, many claiming to be Messiah. You decide if you think it's being fulfilled or not. Sign number two, famine, war, and earthquakes. You decide if it's being fulfilled or not. Sign number three, then you will be handed over to be persecuted, I'm in verse 9, and put to death. And you will be hated by all nations because of me. Now there's two ways of looking at this. Jesus was talking to his disciples. So is he talking about the persecution of the Jewish followers of Jesus? Or is he talking about just persecution of Christians in general? Because if he's talking about persecution of Christians in general, which is the likely interpretation, not the certain one, but according to Voice of the Martyrs ministry, the ministry that tracks the persecuted church, they say there have been more martyrs in the 20th century than the previous 19 centuries combined. Now, here we are in the United States. We don't feel the earthquakes in Tucson, so they're not happening. We don't see people dying, so it's not happening. But in the rest of the world, there have been more martyrs for Christ in the 20th century than the previous 19 combined. You will be persecuted and hated for my name's sake. You decide if you think it's being fulfilled.